Hey everyone, this is John from eastcoastarmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/35th scale German Mass Super Heavy Tank. Unlike many of the other smaller scale builds which are found on my video listings and channel, in which those builds are built for private commission and belong to a private collector, the model that you see here is built for my own collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, like I often mention in these videos, I take on commission build projects from vehicles ranging from 1/35th scale all the way up to 1/6 scale. As for availability and pricing information, that information will be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. The model that you see here is built mostly out of the box. However, it does feature several additions and aftermarket upgrades and mods, all of which will be discussed in this video. Let's first take a quick walk around the model. The Maus was a super heavy tank which was developed by Germany at the tail end of World War II. The tank was designed by Ferdinand Porsche, who was the same man who also developed the Ferdinand and the Elephant tank destroyer. In addition to working on German military vehicles, Ferdinand Porsche is also widely known in the automotive world, as he was one of the key designers at Volkswagen at its founding, as well as his son Ferry Porsche started the sports car company which we all come to know. The vehicle that Mr. Porsche developed was indeed a mammoth. To put things in perspective, the tank came in at 188 tons. In comparison, the largest vehicle that the United States military ever developed, which was the T-28 Super Heavy Tank, weighed in at 95 tons. In addition to that, the vehicle was about 33 feet in length, 12 feet in width, and 11 feet in height. The tank had a crew of 6 men. Clearly, the sheer weight of the vehicle came from the mass of the armor, and this tank was very heavily armored. The thickest point on the turret, as well as even on the frontal hull, was that of about 8 inches, with another 7 inches for just the hull sides. As impressive as the armor thickness was for this vehicle, the tank's armament was equally as awe-inspiring. For the main gun, the vehicle used the 128mm KWK-44. This was the exact same gun which was utilized on the Jag Tiger to great effect, and was also going to be used on the E100 series of tanks, which were on the drawing board at this time. This trait where you see vehicles that have the gun first as a casemate design eventually wind up in a turreted vehicle is something that is quite often seen with German tanks of this time. This was seen first with the 88mm gun, which was used on such casemate designs as the Elephant and the Ferdinand, and wound up on the Tiger 1. Same could also be said with the gun that was used on the King Tiger, how before that vehicle came out, that gun was also utilized on the Jag Panther. For the tank's coaxial armament, the vehicle used a 75mm KWK-44. This was basically the same gun which was utilized on the Panzer IVs. In addition to the cannons, the vehicle also was intended to utilize 2 MG-34T machine guns, which were located in ball mounts on the sides of the turret. Many of the features and design cues that went into the design of the Maus tank, Ferdinand Porsche developed from his other earlier tank designs. This is specifically true for his suspension as well as the automotive aspect of this vehicle. Unlike most conventional tank designs, which utilize an engine which has a drive shaft that connects to a transmission, which then gets diverted to the final drives and the sprockets, the Porsche designs utilize a gas-electric hybrid system. The way this system works is that the engine's sole purpose is just to power a generator. The generator generates the electricity required to power large electric motors, which control and power the track. Porsche was the first designer to incorporate this style of propulsion system in a tracked military vehicle format. The diesel or gas-electric hybrid system has been around many years before Porsche's designs. In fact, they're still utilized today, most commonly found in diesel-electric locomotives, which utilize the exact same premise. Submarines also utilized this propulsion system until the advent of nuclear power. However, Porsche was the first one to incorporate this in a tracked format, and it is a benchmark on all of his tank designs, including the Ferdinand, the Elephant, as well as his VK King Tiger prototypes. It's also interesting to point out that Caterpillar, within recent years, also developed a bulldozer which runs on the same premise. As for the actual engines to power the vehicle, two were slated to be used in this tank. One was the Mercedes-Daimler-Benz BM509 V12, which was a gas engine, and the MB517 V12, which was a diesel engine. The vehicle had a top speed of reported 12 miles an hour, which definitely goes on record for being one of the slowest Porsches ever developed. The vehicle suspension is also heavily derived from Porsche's work on the Ferdinand tank series, in which they utilize two bogies on an arm, and the arm has a spring shock absorber mounted on it. The system is found on the Ferdinand series, as well as some of the Jag Tigers, which were produced as well. On the mouse, Porsche went ahead and utilized two rows of his suspension system in order to spread the weight of the vehicle across a very wide track, which is necessary for a vehicle of this weight in order to prevent it from sinking into the ground. The vehicles did enter into production, however, due to wartime shortages and with the Russians ever more advancing towards Berlin, only two vehicles were actually ever completed. The first vehicle was actually completed as a tank itself with the armament and a turret. The second vehicle was a completed running and operating hull, however, the turret was never fitted to the tank. The idea was the second vehicle was to be used as a transport for the first vehicle in case the first vehicle were to get stuck or to encounter a steep incline. The second vehicle could aid with pulling it up the hill or removing it from a ditch if the vehicle were to get bogged down or stuck. Even with the second vehicle, Porsche actually also designed a special roadway specifically for the Maus tanks to be built for soft terrain conditions. However, I don't believe any of the actual metallic snap-together roadways were ever completed and never left the drawing board. The vehicles themselves were actually able to submerge as well as ford simply due to the weight that the tanks have, and they can't cross over certain bridges. At the very end of the war, with the Russians encroaching onto the location where the Maus was being stored, the Germans decide to destroy the vehicle with demolition charges, and the vehicle was shattered. However, the turret was relatively left intact. When the Russians occupied and captured the area, they discovered the remains of this gigantic tank, as well as they also found the complete second hull shortly nearby. The Russians had the idea to mate the intact hull with the somewhat intact turret from the destroyed vehicle. It is this vehicle that is currently found today on display at the Kubinka Tank Museum. As for the tank's namesake, the vehicle was given the name Maus, which is the German word for mouse. As for why would the Germans go ahead and name such a behemoth of a tank after a mouse, the name was originally supposed to be Mammoth. However, the idea was to change the name of the project to Maus because in order of a way to really, troll the Allies. More specifically was to confuse intelligence officers. If the Allies got wind of a project named Mammoth, they're going to pay attention and divulge into further what that project is. However, if a folder comes across someone's desk as Maus, it's going to slip under the radar, or so they thought. So the vehicle was forever known as Maus. Before I go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplied you with. And here's the model just prior to the start of the project. For the base starter kit, I will be utilizing this plastic Dragon 1990s vintage Mouse Super Heavy Tank plastic kit. Like I said before, the kit is vintage, and the kit itself dates back to 1993. The model that you see here was purchased off of eBay about 10 years ago and has been sitting in the stash in this state ever since, which is evident from the dust which is on the wrapper. As you see, the model is still in its original factory shrink wrap, which I'll open it up on video. As for the base starter kit itself, the Dragon Mouse was the first rendition of this vehicle in plastic in 1/35th scale, which at the time was very significant news in the armor modeling community. And as a kid, I remember seeing advertisements for Dragon with this vehicle as well as the E100 vehicle that they released a year or two later in the advertisement sections found in the magazines. The kit itself is all injection molded plastic construction. There is no resin or photo etch or aluminum components which are supplied with the base starter kit. The vehicle also does not include any figures, which is seen in the box art, which we'll be going over in a moment or two. As for this particular version, this is the original 1993 release with the original box art. About 6 or 7 years later, after the release of this kit, Dragon re-released this model here with a different box art, as well as I believe they also included the figures which are actually seen on the box. That version, I believe, was a Cyber Hobby exclusive and can be found on eBay. The mouse, both the original and the second release, are a bit rare these days to encounter. However, you might luckily score one in a hobby shop or even on an eBay auction from time to time. As for the price on them, they could go anywhere from about 30 to about 80 US dollars due to the rarity of the kit. It's also important to note that as of the date of this video, there is about to be released a new version of the mouse, but not from Dragon. A new tooling kit is about to be released by the company Takom, which may be a lot more accurate compared to the original Dragon offering, as one ding that this kit does have is that Dragon does have some detail inaccuracies on the kit's tooling. These detail inaccuracies are more than likely been repaired and are not present on the Takom releases. I will now go ahead and open the model up for the first time with my little miniature box cutter, and hopefully the kit inside is in perfect order and is not deformed in any way. Otherwise, this is going to be a very short video. And here's the model now with the wrapper removed, where you can get a better view of the box art of the model. The box art, being a Dragon kit, utilizes the work from Ronald Volstead. Ronald Volstead has done many box arts for DML, and the mouse is no exception. Just like with the rest of his artworks, the composition is nicely laid out and is nicely rendered and illustrated. As for the scene itself, you have the mouse, which appears to be in a Berlin suburb, which looks like to be late winter of 1945. Here you have two burning and knocked out Joseph Stalin II tanks in the background, as well as a cluster of German soldiers here in the corner, which look to be wearing the late war period uniforms, as well having a mixed match of different weapons, from the Panzerfaust, Sturmgewehr, and P40, and several 98K Mausers. The rest of the model's graphic design is typical for the 39 to 45 series made by Dragon of the period. And here on the side you can see some of the pictures of the built sample kit, as well as some of the features, namely the suspension and the individual track, which I'll be going over shortly. Cracking open the box, leaves for the model in perfect condition. the way you see it here was exactly how it was last wrapped up by the employee at Dragon back in the early 90s. Starting with the model's hull. The hull is comprised out of several components. You have here the base pan of the vehicle, which was always interesting on the Mouse, was you have such a wide vehicle with such a very narrow lower hull plate. You get a good idea of the detailing. The kit is all comprised out of the typical early 90s gray plastic, which was used by Dragon on a multitude of their kits from this period. Here we have some other components, namely that of the turret. Here goes the gun barrel in 2 halves, the mantlet, as well as the turret's bottom plate. In this bag here we have what's most obviously that of the upper hull. Upper hull has all of its vent detailing present. There is a nice decal sheet that covers up the remainder of the hull, but you will see more of that once the vehicle is built anyway. Here we have the vehicle's turret. You can see the well-cut lines which are present on the end puzzling pieces of the plate. Moving on takes us to the most numerous of components, which is that of the suspension and the track. The Porsche suspension is rendered out pretty well for the tooling, as are the model's road wheels. This is true for all of the runner bags. Now, being a Dragon kit of the 1990s period, the Mouse has your typical construction of track, which is that of link and length, which, needless to say, I will not be using on this build. As we all know, I thoroughly hate and despise this pattern of track. In its place, I will be utilizing a set of aftermarket tracks that are workable. The tracks, as you see here, were procured off of eBay, and they are all workable metal construction, very similar to the Fruley model track links, which I've used on several builds and reviewed in past videos. And just like with the Fruley model track links, they do appear to be very nice and finely molded, and they do supply you with a length of wire in order to make the pin connections actually function. More information on this is to follow. Moving now to the final runner is that of the side armor plate. As you can see, the Mouse, there's not exactly a whole lot of components or really details and fittings that are to be found. The tank is fairly simple and is relevant from the runner layout that you see here. Here you can see the tank's sprockets and turn rollers, as well as the other smaller odds and ends, which are found on various locations on the hull. Going down to the bottom of the box takes us to the instruction, and the instruction sheets are typical Dragon of the period. Now, this being a one-off piece, there are no spare parts that are going to be found on the kit instructions and on the kit components if built out of the box. However, on this build, of course, there will be some parts omitted, namely that of the track. As I mentioned before, aftermarkets will be used in their place. Starting with the model suspension, the suspension that you see on the model here is all stock. What's one unique feature found on the Dragon Moss kit is that the rocker arms and the bogies are actually form-fitting, which is an interesting touch that they gave the kit, specifically since the kit originally has link and link track, which are meant to be glued static. The feature of a pivoting suspension system is a bit lost, but with the swap out of the track, the pivoting suspension becomes a little bit more viable on this build, as you can see here. One tip I strongly recommend in building one of these Moss kits is that you really need to pre-paint the suspension and the inner hull prior to the assembly. Now this is kind of true for basically all tank models. However, it is specifically more crucial on a vehicle like the Mouse, where you have a lot of rows of road wheels as well as a lot of real estate on the inside here that all are literally impossible to thoroughly coat with paint once everything is assembled. So to speed up assembly in order to get a good thorough coating of paint on all the parts, it's a good idea to pre-paint everything while on the runner and in sub-assemblies. As for the wheel rims themselves, the Mouse had all steel rimmed wheels. They were not rubber rimmed. So a brush of dull steel paint were added to all of the road wheels. This is also true for the front idlers. Now, another thing about the front idlers is that on this model here, they are static. They are permanently glued to the hull. And the reason for that is the way the kit is designed. The idlers help support the side hull armor plate as to the hull itself. The pieces went together very quickly and effortlessly, and just like with the road wheels, a brush of paint was added to the idlers themselves. Now, a similar design was featured on the kit sprockets, in which they need to be permanently glued to the tank. However, on this model here, I went ahead and made the sprockets function. By that I mean the sprockets are actually able to pivot. The reason for making specifically the sprockets pivot was for the installation of the track. Because the track is workable on this model, having to fish the track lengths through the upper hull in order to loop it around to connect it was going to be very difficult if the sprockets were permanently in a static state. By making them roll, when it came time to installing the track, I was able to just simply roll the track through the sprocket and fish it through the other end of the tank. The way the sprockets were made to function was that I simply drilled a 1/16 of an inch hole in each of the center of the sprocket hubs, as well as into the tank's hull. Then a 1/16 of an inch piece of floor wire was glued to the sprockets, thus allowing them to pivot, but keeping them separate from the side hull pieces. From the sprockets leads us directly to the tank's track. As you could see, and also from what was mentioned in the unboxing portion of the video, the stock Lincoln Link track were not utilized, and in its place I replaced it with a set of workable metal track links from Spade Ace. The Spade Ace track links are highly recommended for anyone who is working on one of these Dragon Mouse builds. The Spade Ace track links have the exact same type of assembly as well as their overall quality to the Fruly model track links, which, as anyone has seen some of my other builds, are recommended for those builds as well. The Spade Ace track, what's so nice about it is that it is a perfect match with timing of the Dragon sprocket as well as the Dragon wheels. It is a drop-in replacement, and I cannot stress the quality enough. They're very nicely done. Now, one side effect of the metal links is that the tank does have a lot more weight to it compared to the stock plastic offering. I mean, it's a hefty model with these tracks added. This can be considered a good thing, is that it does help settle the model down, and combine that with the articulating suspension will really help distribute the tank's weight, and the tank's weight will also help the suspension contour to any type of surface that the tank is placed on, specifically that of a diorama. Like I mentioned before, the overall quality of the track links are very nicely done and replicate that of the real mouse tracks very well. Now, one side effect of the Spade Ace track links is that they are made out of a lead-based alloy, and like I often caution in my other builds where I work on lead-based metal track links, is that you really need to wash your hands and your workspace frequently when working with this material. This is specifically true for anyone who has children, as the lead can be a contaminant. In addition to washing down your workspace and keeping it clean, it's also a good idea to wipe down your tools that you use in order to assemble the tracks. Once the tracks are fully painted and mounted to the model, though, the lead contamination risk is highly diminished and is no longer an issue. But it is something to keep in mind of for anyone who's working with something like this. Before I go ahead and depart from the suspension, it's important to point out that the Dragon kit does have a few inaccuracies present in the components, which make it unable to be built as the actual mouse tank, the one that was fully built and the one that was destroyed by the crew, with the out-of-the-box components. One of the areas that Dragon has a mistake in is that of the road wheels. From several of the photographs of the destroyed mouse prototype that I've seen, the road wheels had a different pattern compared to the ones found on the kit. The road wheels which were found on the real tank featured small little perforations around the face of all the road wheels. This is similar in concept to what is seen on the Ferdinand and the Elephant. However, if you notice on this kit here, the road wheels have a smooth face appearance. This is because the second vehicle, the one that was never fitted with a turret, that vehicle had this pattern of road wheels present. And more than likely, the reason why it's found on the kit was that the current mouse, the one that was found in the Kabinka Tank Museum, utilized the hull from the turretless tank and the turret from the destroyed tank in order to complete the vehicle. This was the vehicle that Dragon undoubtedly went ahead and visited back in the 1990s to do the research to create the kit that you see here. As for other inaccuracies which are found on the Dragon kit, these are discussed in more detail and more thoroughly on armor modeling forums such as armorama.com. And I strongly recommend for someone to review those threads in order to get a good idea on where the Dragon kit slips up, and more than likely where the newer tooled kits get it right. Moving from the suspension takes us to the front lower plate. The one mod that was absent on the Dragon kit that I added was a small little hole which is found on either side here of the front plate. The purpose of this hole, I believe, is for a tool for maintenance of the track. Another addition that was made was that of the welding marks that you see on this plate. The Dragon kit does not have these welding marks present, and they were added with a Dremel. The kit does have the weld marks which are found here on the top portion, so the addition of the bottom puzzle portion of the welds were not very difficult to add, and once added also helps the accuracy and the look of the model compared to leaving it stock. While on the front, takes us to these small little bosses that are found here on the front plate. These small little bosses here on the real tank would be used for mounting spare track links to the front portion of the vehicle. Even though there are no track links found on this model that I built, I went ahead and added the bosses in their place. The bosses are simple wire brads which were drilled and mounted to the hull, and again, the addition of this detail also helps the look of the model. Moving our way to the rear of the tank, this portion of the build is basically left stock. The one bit of caution I recommend is for that of the German taillight. Painting of the lenses is one easy step that anyone can do that also helps make the model pop and it makes it a little bit more accurate compared to just leaving it as one painted piece. The way these German taillights are painted is that the squares which are found on the top portion of the convoy light are painted in green, and the two lower lenses are painted red and orange. This is true for all of the convoy lights that have this type of pattern. Moving from the convoy light takes us to the large fuel tank. The external fuel tank that you see here is the Dragon unit and is built basically out of the box. The kit does have some seam work to contend with, and what makes the seam work tricky is with the molded in straps and ribs that you see here. Careful sanding with a needle file as well as some fine sandpaper will be required in order to get the fuel tank to the seamless appearance that you see on this build. One mod that I made to the fuel tank was that of the actual fuel line which enters into the tank through this slot here. Now, I've seen this hose in one of the photographs of the vehicle, and it is a pretty non-German way, I should say, of running the fuel line, but it was a simple addition. The way this was done was just a simple piece of floor wire which was just bent and mounted into the location that you see here. More than likely, this is one of the features which really alludes that the mouse, as we know it, is really nothing more than a rough proof of concept prototype vehicle, and chances are really, really likely that if the tank were to enter into serious production, this system here would have been a lot more refined. If we can also see, the fuel tank is painted as a different color than the rest of the tank. This was done just to make the piece stand out from just having it just with the basic camouflage. You can also see I went ahead and weathered it with the fuel, where it's nice and shiny, as typically when fuel spills on a gas tank like that, it tends to leave that sooty residue left behind. Moving our way to the front glass display takes us to the Bosch lights. The headlights that you see on this model here are your standard German AFE Bosch light and are the kit original ones and were used as per the kit instructions. Kit ones were decent quality and no need to replace them, I found. As for painting them, a simple little brush of silver paint on the lens portion was really all that was needed. However, one addition that I made that was not supplied with the kit was that of the actual power cable detailing that you see on this model. As for the power cable, it is fabricated out of a thin little piece of wire. The wire was drilled into both the corner of the Bosch light as well as into the top portion where they enter into the hull. It's a simple little bit of detailing, but again, also one that helps the look and accuracy of the model. Another little bit of detailing that was added was the actual little grab handle for the driver's hatch. The kit was missing this little detailing, and it was again a simple little bit that was added that helps make it pop. Moving our way to the tank's top deck and engine deck, the model is actually very simple, and all of the components you see here are all stock and built out of box. The two areas of interest for me on this portion is that of the exhaust manifold. The exhaust manifold on the mouse features the layout you see here, where it's one on each side. The exhaust outlet is the stock kit original, which was simply weathered with my rust and soot technique. The one portion of the build which was an aftermarket component, which is found on this section here, is that of the antenna base. The antenna bases that you see here were not supplied with the kit, and the kit has 0 components for this bit of detailing. The antenna base you see here was acquired aftermarket and is from RB Model. The piece was acquired from eBay from the vendor listed in the description. The component is RB Model's number 35A15. And the set is highly recommended. The set contains enough components for one antenna base, and for this model you will need 2. Each of the antenna bases comprise out of 2 components. You have the bottom base, the top ring. The piece is CNC brass and is fully drilled out, so mounting on the antenna wire was very, very easy. As you may have noticed, the vehicle only has one antenna mounted to the antenna base. The reason for this is for both to represent the tank with having only one radio fitted on the inside, but there is also a practical reason for the use of only one antenna, and that has to do with rotating of the turret. One issue that the mouse has as a modeling standpoint is with the antennas. Because of their location, you're always going to be hitting the antenna wires when you rotate the turret. So in this model here, in order to have the turret rotate more easily, I only modeled it with one antenna wire. Now on the real mouse, this wouldn't be a problem, as on the real tank, the antenna bases are made out of a flexible rubber, so when you rotate the turret, the antennas simply just sway out of the way and are not really a nuisance. On a model, however, when the pieces are specifically made out of brass, you constantly have to bend the wire around and it just becomes a mess after a while. As for painting of the parts, like I often mention in these smaller scale videos, the antenna wire and the antenna base itself are best painted in flat black. Now, on the real German antenna base, there's a small little brass tube which emerges from the antenna base, and the purpose of this tube is this is the actual component where the wire from the antenna actually connects to the base. Now, to replicate that in 1/35th scale, I just take a simple brush of brass paint and I paint the lower portion of the antenna base. What this does is that this gives the detail of the connecting component for the wire in the base. Now, as for the opposite side, since it does not have the antenna wire fitted, I simply cut the wire shorter and just painted the piece with the brass. Moving our way to the tank's turret first takes us to the gun and the mantlet. Now, the gun that you see here is the stock original gun from the kit, as well as not only the main armament, but what makes the Moss series unique is that rather than having a coaxial machine gun, they actually have a coaxial 75mm gun. Both of the barrels you see here are kit supplied, and like most average model kits, are a two-piece affair that need to be glued together and then having a seam deleted. Now, as for the actual mantlet, the mantlet is the stock original one, however was modified and having added cast texturing that you see here. The Dragon kit, this piece here was very smooth and did not have this type of detailing present. Now, one thing to point out on the mantlet, actually two things to point out, is first with the small little arm that you see here. This is where the instructions are a little bit vague in actually mounting on this component. The purpose of this arm is that this arm here holds up this little tray which braces both the two guns that are found on the turret. The piece that's supplied with the kit does mount on in the correct manner. However, it is a little hazy on the actual mounting and the length that the kit has. The piece for this arm here is a straight piece of plastic that the kit does tell you to bend with a certain measurement. However, it is best done while actually dry fitting it to the model repeatedly until finally you have it at the right point, to which then you glue it in place. The second mistake that the turret has in regards to assembly is that if you look at the photographs on the side of the viewer, you'll see that the peg that the mantlet plugs into for the gun is actually molded upside down. If you follow the instructions appropriately, you will not be able to mount the mantlet to the tank. The best way to fix this is you first assemble it as per the instructions, and then right before the addition of the mantlet, with a Dremel, you delete the molded-in tab which is found on the lug that the mantlet mounts to. Once that is removed, the mantlet will easily fit directly into place. Now, another mod that was made to the turret, which was missing, was that of this little slit that you see here on the left-hand side of the turret. The purpose of this slot here is what I believe is a optic for that of the main gun. However, it's a little hazy on whether or not it's a third coaxial machine gun, but from knowing the King Tiger, I'm guessing that this is more than likely just an optic. And if I am mistaken with the purpose of this slot here, feel free to correct me or set the record straight in the comment section listed below. As for the slit itself, this was not found in the turret molding and was added by myself with that of a Dremel and a router bit. By removing that slight little bit of material, which has to be done very carefully as you don't want to go off center or make the hole too big, it also helps the look of the model. The rest of the turret's detailing that you see here is all stock, with no mods made to it, and was simply assembled out of box, and the pieces went on pretty quickly and effortlessly for that matter. Now, one thing to point out is that on the side portions here of the turret, on either side there are these two ports. The purpose of these ports were, I believe at one point the mouse had two MG34 machine guns mounted in balls which were located on the sides. And what makes them interesting from what I've seen from the blueprints as well as a few of the other reference materials is that these machine gun balls were actually the ones which were used on the German Hull machine gun on the Tiger I. The machine gun ports are not included with the kit. Instead, they have the port which looks like it's plated over on the inside. I believe this is also the case with the Moss that is in Kubinka. However, I'm not sure if the tank went to battle with the machine guns or if it was removed at a certain point or if the Russians just patched it up when they put the tank up on display. Moving our way to the paint and the markings, the tank, as you can see here, has no markings added to it. The kit does supply you with a set of basic and generic German AFV decals. However, really towards this point of the war, the Germans really moved away from having any type of markings of any sort on their tanks, which makes sense as at this point here, anything with a German cross on it was fair game to be bombed by the Allies. As for the model's camouflage pattern, the camouflage pattern that you see on this build here was based off of an illustration of the mouse that I found on the internet. That illustration claims that the mouse prototype, the one that was destroyed by the crew before the Russians showed up into the area, that vehicle had a camouflage pattern which was very similar to the one you see on this build. Now, because of the inaccuracies that I mentioned before about the Dragon kit, you cannot build this model as a true-to-detail rendition of that vehicle. So the vehicle that you see here is built as a fictional piece. However, the blotch layout as well as the colors that are used were contemporary for the German tanks of the period. Overall, I'm very happy the way the model turned out. The kit itself was a pretty simple build, and other than the addition of the aftermarket track, the kit kind of really came together very well. The fit and finish was also pretty good, and for anyone who's tackling this, the only other thing I need to mention besides the other mods and additions that I recommended in this video is to watch out for some of the seaming which is found in order to get the hull panels together. Because of the way the kit is designed, you will have some seams to contend with, namely along the sides of the hull. And why I'm saying you have to exhibit caution is because of the integral molded in welds and puzzling hull pieces. If you use too much filler or super glue in order to delete these seams, you may kill these details, these subtle details that are found on this section here, so care needs to be exhibited in that location. Other than that, the model was a pretty simple build. As for a skill level and recommendation, I can't really recommend this kit to a beginner simply due to the fact of you're going to need to replace the tracks, in my opinion, and the stock tracks are really just abysmal. Because of that, this kit here is really more or less built for someone who is more of an intermediate to an advanced range, which is pretty weird because outside of the tracks, the kit itself is actually pretty simple and is not necessarily very difficult to put together. So possibly if someone is a beginner and has a couple kits under their belt and has the patience to work with the metal track, I could definitely see him pulling through, but by and large, this is really more or less an intermediate to advanced range. Now, it's also interesting to point out that at the time of this video, there are currently 2 other renditions of the Maus Super Heavy tank that have been built in a plastic kit form. One being from the company TACOM, and the other being from Bronco. Now, both those kits are more than likely way more accurate and have a lot of other features which are absent on this Dragon version here that are found supplied with the kit. So if anyone who is interested in building a Maus and really wants to make a really accurate, dead-on accurate rendition, more than likely the Bronco and the TACOM are the way to go. The Bronco kit, I believe, also has the edge of having a full interior detailing, which is a nice touch. However, is really one that, unless you're doing something specifically for the interior, is not necessarily that important, but it's an interesting feature nonetheless. Now, I can't really say for the Bronco kit, but I believe the TACOM kit has the individual Lincoln Lane track, which is, again, a feature that I am not a big fan of, and more likely you're probably going to have to resort back to the Spade Ace tracks in order to correct that. However, I might be wrong, and the track that's supplied with the kit may as well be workable as in a plastic form, but seeing some of the recent TACOM releases is highly unlikely. The Bronco kit may also have plastic workable tracks. However, again, since I haven't seen the kit firsthand, I can't really say whether or not. And with those other 2 renditions floating around, the price of the Dragon renditions is probably not only going to stay the same, but may also decrease simply due to the more advanced competition. So if anyone is looking to scratch that itch to build a Maus and do it on a budget, you might want to check out one of these kits. However, you got to keep in mind you are going to have to spend money on the aftermarket track and the antenna bases, which in the end may bring the price up to the more recent releases. As for recommendation, I really recommend this kit for someone who is not only a fan of World War II armor, but also a fan of German armor, as the Maus is arguably the last tank which was built by the Germans in World War II. The kit is also a nice addition to add to a collection for anyone who's interested in the super heavy tanks, such as the T-28, the Tortoise, the Troyanov, as well as even the M103s and T-29s. All are in good company with the mouse in their collection. And that concludes this model showcase video for this 1/35th scale Moss German World War II super heavy tank prototype. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, where there are more photographs of this build in more detail, as well as all the other smaller scale builds and 1/6 scale builds that I've built and posted on the channel. Also, don't forget to stop by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks for watching.